What's up, everyone? And it's the second day till Christmas, and I am bringing to you an updated deck profile of my Amorphage. Now, Amorphage is a very interesting deck that basically, the deck is just full of the Dragon Busters. So basically, every Amorphage monster has an effect to basically your opponent cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. Well, actually, not your opponents, and either player. So basically, it just shuts down that entire mechanic. And some of the Amorphages have actually seen competitive play, mainly the Amorphage Goliath. And without further ado, let's get right into the deck profile. First, I run 3 Amorphage Lechery. Now, all the Amorphages except for Sloth and Goliath have the effect of this card's Pendulum Summon or Flip face up. Neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck while this card's face up on the field. And Goliath and Sloth, just as long as they're on the field, or as long as they're monsters on the field, that effect is why they don't have to be flip summoned or pendulum summoned. Now, the Amorphages have different pendulum effects, and the pendulum effects are actually pretty good. First of all, you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can activate spell cards for the rest of the turn. Once per turn during the standby phase, or during your standby phase, tribute 1 monster or destroy this card. That's the one downside for Amorphage, is that they have to tribute a monster or the pendulum scale will get destroyed. Although if you already have, let's say, a decently high stat Amorphage monster on the field, that's not really going to matter too much, because we do run ways to bring those cards back from the scales to your hand. And all of the Amorphages have that effect. Now, the negating spell cards, each Amorphage is different. While Lechery takes care of spells, each of the Amorphages take care of different types of cards or summons and stuff. Next, I run 2 Goliath. Honestly, Goliath was my least favorite out of the Amorphage monsters. And the one downside is that it is at level 2, like Lechery. Because unfortunately, Lechery, Gluttony, Sloth, and Goliath cannot be pendulum summoned because the scales go from 3 to 5. So you can't really even pendulum summon the Amorphage monsters, or those Amorphage monsters. But you can maybe set scale or set Gluttony or use it as a scale to bring out one of the other Amorphage monsters. Now, Gluttony's pendulum effect is monsters cannot activate their effects. So basically, it's just a Mystic Mine, more or less. I also run the 3 Amorphage Envy. Envy, if you control a Amorphage monster, neither player can activate cards or effects as Chain Link 2 or higher. That's a bit of a niche play, but as for the level 4 Amorphages, I max out on all of them because you kind of really need to, because those are the ones that can be pendulum summoned, while the others you'd rather have as scales. Next, I run 3 Amorphage Wrath. Wrath, neither player can tribute monsters except Amorphage monsters as its pendulum effect. Now, Wrath, I'd say out of all the pendulum effects, is probably one of the least useful, but because it is a level 4, it does work with the scales. I also run the 3 Amorphage Pride. Neither player can take any effect damage, so it prevents players from taking effect damage, which doesn't really matter too much because in this deck, you don't really inflict any effect damage, but your opponent may be playing some sort of strategy that does. Again, it's mainly just a level 4 monster that can be pendulum summoned, and when it is on the field, your opponent cannot special summon monsters, or neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck. And aside from Lechery, they all actually got pretty good attack and defense stats. Either have 0 attack or 0 defense, but the other is pretty good, like this one's 1750. I also run 3 Amorphage Greed. Greed, neither player can activate trap cards or their effects except Amorphage cards. So you shut down spells, monsters, traps, just all sorts of things, and neither player can special summon monster in the extra deck. If you can get a Amorphage monster to stick, you're most likely going to win the game unless your opponent is playing some sort of a strategy that doesn't really rely on the extra deck, like Infernoids. Actually, I took this to a tournament once, and one of the matchups was Infernoid. I'm like, the week I decided to play Amorphage, I have to go against Infernoids, and I never, that's the only time I ever went against Infernoid, which is odd. Although, I guess in the current metagame with Floowandereeze, it's definitely not going to be that really important of a deck. I run 3 Sloth. Sloth, neither player can add cards from the deck to the hand except by drawing them. Now, Sloth isn't really one you want so much as a scale as more so you want it as the monster. Because unlike the other ones, as long as it's on the field, neither player can special summon monsters. It doesn't have to be pendulum summoned, it doesn't have to be flip summoned. I also run the 3 Goliath. Like Sloth, you more or less want it for the monster effect, although the pendulum effect is also really good too because it's basically a magical cosmos. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead except Amorphage cards. Moving on to spells. I run the 1 Amorphage Infection. All Amorphage monsters on the field gain 100 attack defense for each Amorphage card on the field. If a monster in your hand or your control is attributed or destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can add a Amorphage card from your deck to your hand. It's a bit of a niche card, but if you, by any chance, let's say you want to use the effect of the Pendulum Scale to attribute a monster to protect your scales rather than just letting them go, you can use that to add an Amorphage monster back, and so it kind of helps with keeping advantage. Next, I run the 3 Wavering Eyes. Wavering Eyes basically contributes many Pendulum Zone, as many cards in each player's Pendulum Zones as possible, then apply this effect. Then apply each effect in sequence. 1, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. 2, you can add a Pendulum monster from your main deck to your hand. 3, you can banish 1 card on the field, and 4, you can add 1 Wavering Eyes from your deck to your hand. Wavering Eyes is really cool, mainly because with the Amorphage effects to work during the standby phase, you have to tribute the other Amorphage monster you control to keep it. And let's say you don't want to do that and you want to actually keep the Amorphage monsters on the field. You can use this to basically destroy your own Amorphage Pendulum Scales since they're going to be destroyed anyways. And you can actually add an Amorphage or add a Pendulum monster from your main to your hand and burn for 500. And if you happen to be going against a Pendulum base deck, it's just going to do even more work. Next, I run the 3 Pot of Prosperity. Our extra deck is irrelevant because we can't even summon from the extra deck, so run Pot of Prosperity. You can also run Pot of Extravagance too. That is also an option. Both are really good because your extra deck doesn't matter in the slightest. Also run the 2 Pendulum Paradox. Pendulum Paradox, you can add 2 face-up Pendulum monsters with the same Pendulum Scale, but different names from your extra deck to your hand. I only run 2 because as for the skills, you only really run 2 level skills, and most oftentimes when you activate Paradox, you may not exactly have 2 level 5s or 2 level 3s. You may have a level 3 and a level 5, but in the later games, Pendulum Paradox is definitely going to be helping you out because then you can do more Pendulum Summoning. Also run the 2 Pendulum Treasure, add a Pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up. Let's say you have 2 scales, but you don't have an Amorphage monster to summon it. You can use the Pendulum Treasure to take an Amorphage monster, send it to your extra deck, and then you can use that for the Pendulum Summon. And of course, it's just going to lock your opponent out, or lock both players out of spell summoning from the extra deck. Moving on to the traps. I run 3 Pendulum Reborn. Special summon 1 face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck or 1 Pendulum monster from your graveyard. Now this card is definitely good. While it does not work against the lower level Pendulum monsters because they have to be flip face up or Pendulum summon in order for them to have their effect, it does work against the Amorphage Goliath and the Amorphage Sloth. So you can use it on, let's say you send, during the standby phase, you send Goliath to, or destroy Goliath of its own effect. You activate Reborn to just summon the Goliath to the field. And there's going to be, your opponent's going to be hard to basically get rid of it because of just how oppressive the Amorphages are. And basically their only outs are going to be to just negate your monster or your monster's effects, like with stuff like Dark Ruler or Droplets. That's why I run 3 Solemn Judgment. When a monster be summoned or a spell trap card is activated, pay half your life points, negate the activation or summon, and if you do, destroy that card. That's definitely really good because your opponent's going to be trying to either use a spell or trap to remove the Amorphage monsters from the field, or maybe a monster that can negate them. But if you don't even but Solemn Judgment is basically there to just protect your own cards. Moving on to the extra deck. It really doesn't matter, honestly. Amorphages, you can't even special summon from your extra deck, so unless you size something like a Super Poly or some sort of fusion card, then maybe your extra deck might matter, but I do not run any Super Poly in this build, so what you really run doesn't really matter because you're not even going to touch your extra deck. Like, honestly, I was even thinking about putting some Monarchs card in here just because if you don't use your extra deck and you don't want to run it, or even use an extra deck, then the Monarchs are obviously good to use. But I'd rather run Pot of Prosperity over that for the Excavating Power because sometimes your hand may not be ideal enough to really get your Amorphages going. So that's going to be it for my Amorphage deck file. Up next tomorrow for the final day of the 12 days of Yu-Gi-Oh! We have Greta Plants. I'll see you then.